Hey guys, it's Brian from PhoneArena here, and today we're going to take a look at the Motorola Photon Q. Now the Photon Q is Sprint's latest 4G LTE phone, and at first glance it looks a lot like the original Photon. You've got a 4.3-inch QHD display, you have an 8-megapixel camera in the back, you have a micro USB and a micro HDMI slot on the side, and overall the design is pretty much the same with the trim and everything, but one thing that the original Photon didn't do, of course, is slide open and reveal a full QWERTY keyboard. And this is really where the Photon Q sets itself apart from all the other competition. Don't see too many full QWERTY keyboards these days. It's definitely something that's gone by the wayside for the most part, but there is also a market segment that really wants them, and the Photon Q does have an excellent keyboard here. The travel on these keys is really nice. Not sure if you can hear this, but there's a real nice click every time you hit those keys. The keypad also lights up. All this white around here is each key is individually LED backlit, so it's got a real good look to it, and it just performs extraordinarily well. So that is definitely a strong point of the Photon Q, is this QWERTY keyboard. The form factor actually stays pretty much the same as the original Photon. It's just a little bit thicker, and then a little bit narrower and a little bit shorter, so overall it's not much of a difference. Other than that, the specs are actually pretty similar. The Photon Q does have a dual-core 1.5 gigahertz processor, which is of course better than the original Photon. We reached out to Motorola to find out what exactly the processor is, and the best answer we could get is that it's a Snapdragon processor. So since it's 1.5 gigahertz, we're betting it's probably an S4, and the benchmarks kind of back that up, but we never got an official word, and if we do get that, we will update our review. So for now, all we know is it's a 1.5 gigahertz processor. It's got 1 gig of RAM and then 8 gigs of internal memory, only about 4.5 of which are available to the user, but it does have a memory card slot on the side here. So this is really nice. You pop your little micro SD card in. Unfortunately, it does not have a removable battery, which is a pretty big disappointment for a phone that's this thick. You know, we kind of knocked the Evo 4G LTE for that, but at the same time, that's an incredibly thin phone. Just kind of the design sort of warranted that. Same with the 1X. And that also comes with a 2000 milliamp battery. The Photon Q is only 1785, so it's a smaller battery and a bigger phone. So we really would have liked to seen a removable battery on that. That said, the battery life isn't too bad. The screen's going to drain you pretty quickly, but standby time overnight it dropped about 10%, being left alone for probably 12 hours. So pretty good standby time, and then just in our general usage, we were able to get through the day without much problem. But given that this does have the QWERTY keyboard, it's going to be a phone that's a little bit more designed towards power users, to people who are emailing a lot, things like that. And of course your screen's going to be on a lot for something like that. So a little bit of a concern, something you probably want to grab an extra charger for, have one at the office, but just something to keep in mind. Let's take a quick look at the interface here. First thing we're going to notice is the display is 4.3 inches, same as the Photon. QHD, which is also same as the Photon, and that's a bit of a disappointment given that the Atrix HD is a 4.5 720p display, but it uses Motorola's Color Boost technology, which they claim makes images look brighter, more vivid, and overall the colors are really good on this display, so we are pleased with that. As you can see, it is running Android 4.0. We have on-screen buttons, which means that it is kind of in line with the Google philosophy here. We do not have the capacitive buttons down at the bottom, but as you can see, there is a lot of room down there, so we kind of would have preferred those capacitive buttons and a little bit more real estate, given that the screen resolution is a little bit low to begin with. Overall, it's a fairly vanilla build of Android, although you can see the icons here for your stock things like your people and your phone are going to be different. There is still some Motorola touches here. Hopefully what we're thinking is that they just haven't really integrated the Google Motorola thing yet, because for the most part it does follow along with the new ice cream sandwich and their coming jelly bean design language, but at the same time it kind of does its own thing as well. The launcher is basically stock, but at the same time Motorola again has added some nice little things. The circle widget, it's really kind of cool. It's very simple, but You can add cities that way. Each of these can be flicked around, so just little nice touches. And then also something like the people. These icons down here where you've got the little arrows, if you just flick those up, it's going to come up almost like a folder does, with either your people, your recent call history, you can recent text messages, which we don't have any. Same thing with your browser shortcuts. So it's pretty nice. Now we said the browser shortcuts, that is on the stock browser, which this does have, but as you see our little icon here, it also ships with Google Chrome. So it's a little bit of a transition device. As we saw on the Nexus 7, Chrome is the default browser. It is the only browser included out of the box. The Photon Q here has Chrome, and it has the original browser as well. Chrome is a much better browser. There is no two ways about it. Definitely something we prefer. Let's go ahead and get this up here. While we're showing you this, we'll just let you know that you do have swipe as a keyboard option if you want to do it on screen as well. But let's load our web page here and see how that web performance is. As you can see, nice and snappy. Everything moves just as you would think it is. Panning, double tapping, everything moves quite nicely. So this is what we're expecting with Chrome. No different on this phone. The power of the phone with the 1.5 gigahertz dual-core processor allows it to run this very nicely. So all in all, a very good overall browsing and just overall system experience. We didn't notice any real lag in the system, and we do like the fact that it's pretty much vanilla Android. We wish that Motorola would just kind of go all the way and do that, but at the same time, there's not much of a manufacturer influence on this. There's definitely not a manufacturer skin, so hopefully that means a little bit quicker updates. In terms of the Sprint lineup, the Photon Q is probably going to slot in between the LG Viper and the Samsung Galaxy Nexus in their LTE lineup, so more down towards the end rather than up at the top with the Evo 4G LTE and the Samsung Galaxy S3. And that's just due in part to the fact that it doesn't have such a big display, doesn't have quite as much memory, things like that. But at the same time, it of course does has this QWERTY keyboard, which is going to make it very compelling to a certain market segment, the business users, the heavy texters that prefer this keyboard. And overall, the phone is still a good size. It's pocketable. It's not thin by any means, but like we said, it's only about 1.5 millimeters thicker than the original Photon, which is only a year old. So they've done well to integrate the QWERTY without making the size too much bigger. And we also have to say that in terms of benchmarks, it ran with and sometimes beat the Galaxy S3. So even though it doesn't have quite the power the Galaxy S3 does, the fluidity of the operating system, and we would speculate that the fact that it doesn't really have any any manufacturer skin on top of it is helping out the performance and keeping it up there with the big boys at times. So it's kind of an interesting device. It could do some things better. Like we've mentioned several times, the screen could be better. Also, the 8 megapixel camera, it ticks off some of the boxes. You know, it's 8 megapixels. It records 1080p video. You can take pictures and record videos at the same time. But the quality just wasn't up to par with the Samsung and the HTC phones that we've seen thus far. But that said, the Motorola Photon Q, especially if it hits the $100 or so price point, is going to be a really compelling device for a lot of people thanks to this QWERTY keyboard. The call quality on it was good. Callers really enjoyed the way we sounded. They rated us fairly high. We thought it could have been a little bit better just in terms of the naturalness and the sound reproduction, but at the same time we didn't have any problems listening to callers. We thought they sounded just fine. So performance-wise, the Photon Q really, it does well. It's up against some stiff competition from HTC and Samsung. Doesn't quite live up to that. Like we said in our review, the QWERTY keyboard is a dying breed. We don't see very many of them, but this one is done extremely well, and for those users that want a QWERTY keyboard, this is definitely a phone to look at.